Carl on the Lightning Dev Kit project, or LDK, and I'm here to talk to you about the Async Payments protocol, which is a really exciting protocol that's coming to the Lightning Network this year. And so to understand why we need async payments, I first want to start with kind of a motivating example or use case. So let's say we have Alice and Bob, and they're both non-custodial mobile users. This means that they want to hold their own keys, they want to make Lightning payments on the go, and they don't want anyone else to be able to spend their Bitcoin for them. They want to keep their own keys, be non-custodial. And let's say Alice and Bob go to the bar one day, and Bob buys Alice some beers. And then later that night, he sends her an invoice over Signal. But Alice doesn't see it immediately, and Bob just goes to sleep after that. So several hours later, Alice goes on her phone, she sees the invoice, she goes to pay it, and because Bob's phone is offline, this payment is going to fail. And this is just a problem with for non-custodial mobile users on Lightning in general. It's like the offline receive problem. In today's Lightning, you need to be online to receive. That doesn't work for mobile users, as you can see. So how can we do better than this? Well, before we get into async payments, I want to touch on some existing partial solutions to this problem that aren't necessarily trying to solve this problem, but they kind of dance around the issue or partial solutions. So one would be, some people think that everyone in Bitcoin should just run a Raspberry Pi, but that's really hard. I don't know if I could really ask my grandma to do that. I don't think so. You could also just use a custodial solution, but lame, we don't want to do that. There's also blockchain greenlight. Again, not really trying to solve this problem, but basically in non-custodial setups, the user's phone still needs to be online to receive the blockchain greenlight. There's also key send and AMP, but once again, you need to be online to receive. There's also LN URL, but A, you have to be online to receive, and B, it requires Bob either trusting an LN URL server or running his own LN URL server. There's also mobile notifications, so people are still experimenting with this one today, and it's showing some potential, but the problem is if Bob goes camping for 3 days, his phone is just going to have no service, and the notification is not going to come through, so he won't be able to get paid. And there's also long CLTV, and we're going to talk about this one more later, but it also doesn't work. We need async payments, right? So in order to explain how async payments works, I first want to go through kind of a normal successful Lightning payment between Alice and Bob and kind of how that goes. So to start with, in a normal successful Lightning payment, first of all, because Alice and Bob are mobile users, they're probably connected to the Lightning network. Their main channels are with LSPs, or Lightning Service Providers. Who knows what LSPs are?
So,
okay, people know what LSPs are, but basically they just have to stay online, make sure you can always send and receive, make sure you have inbound liquidity, just make your Lightning experience smooth. And then if we make this example even more realistic, let's say Alice and Bob's LSPs aren't directly connected, there's actually a hop between them, Dave. So that means if Alice wants to pay Bob, it would have to go through her LSP, to Dave, to Bob's LSP, and finally to Bob. So let's walk through how this would go. So the first step would be Alice logging in her Bitcoin to her channel with her LSP. From there, her LSP would forward the payment, so we would lock up some of its Bitcoin with its channel with Dave. Dave similarly would lock up in its channel with Bob's LSP, and finally, Bob's LSP would lock up Bitcoin with Bob. And because Bob is the receiver, he is the only one that is able to unlock this Bitcoin. And while this Bitcoin is locked up, it's essentially held in kind of trustless escrow, but it's way cooler than that because there's just no way for any of these hops along the route to take the money besides Bob. So Bob's the receiver, Bob has the secret, he uses the secret to unlock the Bitcoin, and you can see the Bitcoin goes to him, that's him getting paid, and he's basically done. And in exchange, his LSP gets the secret key, and it uses this key to unlock its Bitcoin with Dave, so it collects its fee. Dave similarly releases the secret to unlock its Bitcoin, he gets his routing key, and finally Alice gets the secret, her LSP gets paid, and this key plus the invoice together make proof that Alice paid Bob. And Alice can use this in a court of law if Bob tries to say that she didn't pay him. It's great. So this works really well, but let's go through where this process kind of breaks down for mobile non-custodial users. So we're going to go through kind of the same example, but in this case, Bob is actually offline. His phone is not available to release the secret. So if this is kind of the situation, we'll go through the same steps as before. So Alice will lock in for Bitcoin. Her LSP will lock in its Bitcoin, Dave will lock in his Bitcoin, but at this stage, Bob's LSP will basically see that Bob is offline and unable to provide the secret, and at this point, it'll see that Bob is offline, and as a result, it will be forced to fail this payment backwards. So Dave's Bitcoin goes back to him, Alice's Bitcoin goes back to it, and finally, Alice's Bitcoin goes back to her because she essentially failed to pay Bob. So that's really sad, and how does Async Payments fix this problem? That's what we're about to talk about, but first I want to touch on a solution that someone came up with a few years ago for this problem. So let's say we get to this stage of the protocol where the Bitcoin is all locked along the root, but Bob is still asleep. Why can't we all just wait here and chill for a second, and Bob comes back online tomorrow, and then he can release the secret and everything's good? This was actually proposed a few years ago by Roy from Greaves, but the problem with that is that while this liquidity is locked up along the road, especially in the middle, it's unavailable for being used for any other payments. So until Bob comes back online, it's locked up and it can't go anywhere and it can't do anything. And you can imagine that if everyone on the network did this, it would not really scale because all liquidity across the network would be locked up at all times, and it would essentially be a DOS attack on the network. So that's a problem, and how can we do better? Well, Async Payments fixes this, and basically now we're going to go through the actual Async Payments protocol. So it starts out in the same way as the normal successful payment in that Alice first locks up her Bitcoin. And something to note is that this Bitcoin is going to stay locked up for the duration until Bob comes back online, which could be tomorrow, next week, whatever. And you might be wondering, why is that okay? And I just want to touch on why. Basically, it's okay because Alice already said goodbye to this Bitcoin. She already decided, this is going to Bob, I don't need it anymore. She's already accepted it's not part of her balance. And on the flip side, her LSP, doesn't care that this Bitcoin is locked up because it was originally Alice's balance anyway, so what does it care if Alice just wants to lock up her funds forever? It just doesn't affect the LSP, and it also doesn't affect anyone else on the network. It only affects their specific channel. So I just wanted to touch on why that's okay. And so that's the first step of Async Payments. Alice locks it in as normal. But the next step diverges from the usual successful lightning payments we went through, because Alice's next move is to send an onion message to Bob's LSP, basically telling Bob's LSP, hey, when Bob comes online, tell my LSP to release the payment. So this is the next step of Async Payments. And when Bob's LSP receives this message, it will start watching for Bob to come back online. Okay, so at this point, Alice is also free to go to sleep and just turn her phone off, because a very important aspect of this protocol is that Alice and Bob never have to be online at the same time. That's pretty important for mobile users. So as a next step, let's say the next day or the next week, Bob comes back online. And at this point, he's ready, his keys, his secret is ready to be released. So the next step is for his LSP to send a message to Alice's LSP saying, hey, Bob is online now, feel free to release this payment. So at this point, Bob's online, everything's ready, the Bitcoin's locked here, so we then go through the normal lightning steps of LSP locking it up, Dave locking it up, and finally Bob's LSP will lock up the Bitcoin. At this point, Bob is online, so we can release the secret. And we go through the normal claiming process that we went through of the Async Payments. Oh, and after Bob releases this secret, he's also free to go back offline. He got paid, so he's done. We keep passing the secret along, the same as the normal successful payment. At this point, Alice is still not online, so her LSP will just kind of leave at this point, but as we talked about, it's fine for this Bitcoin to keep being locked up. And finally, Alice will then come back online at a certain point, and her LSP will release the secret to her, and she got paid, so that's great. And yeah, it's a big step for Lightning UX, so this is able to happen, and you ought to notice that Alice and Bob never had to be online at the same time. So yeah, it's a really cool, yeah.
What if this never goes back online? Is Bob able to use his phone?
Yes, Bob already got paid. As soon as he released the secret, he got his money, and he's just done. He never has to come back online again. But if Alice never comes back online, her LSP has the key, and this is a little bit technical, but basically if she never comes back online, her LSP will broadcast the channel on chain, and her LSP will be able to get the money that way. So we don't want that to happen, and but we're going to make the timeouts really long, so hopefully that will never have to happen. But yeah, it's not that no one ever has to be online, it's just that they don't have to be online at the same time, and they can be offline for a long time. Yeah?
What about privacy?
Oh, we're going to talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. What did you say? Yes, it's time locked. Yeah, the CLTV is really long. Is that what you meant?
Yes. And we have
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, that's not.
Yeah, there's a timeout. Yeah. So, you know, you can't stay offline forever. Like, we don't know what timeouts people are going to use yet, but I mean, it could be up to a few months. That seems kind of crazy, but it's technically possible. So, yeah, people have a long time to come.
Or the message me.
Oh, we're going to talk about that too. Yeah. Okay, so,
LSP's liquidity get locked up this scale, a lot of liquidity for LSP already locked up.
Well, the liquidity will only be locked up in its channel with Alice. So LSPs generally have a channel to every single user, if that makes sense. So the fact that Alice's Bitcoin is locked up doesn't affect any of the other users or any of the LSP's other liquidity. So like in the naive version, like the Bitcoin here would have been locked up for a long time, and that's bad because that does affect other LSP users. But in this case, it's only locked up right there, so it's it doesn't. Yeah.
That's the initiation of the async payment locked into certain route.
Yes, it does. Yeah. So we're also going to touch on that part too. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any resource concern for the LSP about the constantly checking lobbies?
There shouldn't be because like all Lightning nodes automatically monitor whether their channel peers are online anyway. So it's something they're already looking at. So yeah. All right, so that's great. And now we're going to talk about onion messages, route blending, privacy, and stuff. But first, I want to touch on another use case that Async Payments also helps with, and this is tipping Tim on Twitter. So let's say instead of like Bob sending Alice an invoice over Signal, Alice wants to pay some guy Tim on Twitter for his open source contributions or something, and Tim from his side, he wants to post like a static payment, some kind of static payment identifier in his Twitter bio that he doesn't have to update, and everyone can just like pay him whenever it's convenient for them. And let's say Tim is also a mobile Lightning user, right? So actually in today's Lightning, this is not really possible because Lightning invoices can only be used once. And because once Bob basically releases the secret that we talked about, it can't be released again. And if someone else did pay it, it would put his funds at risk. So basically, if Tim, with today's Lightning, wanted to do this, he would have to swap out every single time he got paid, and that doesn't really work. But okay, that's a problem. But let's say we had some kind of reusable invoice thing of some kind, and for example, this could be with Bolt 12, which also comes with a lot of other like privacy benefits. It comes with static QR codes. It comes with refunds, subscriptions in the future. So let's say we had this technology. That still doesn't complete the picture because, you know, Tim might be offline when someone goes to pay him, and in that case, he wouldn't be able to receive. But, I mean, okay, that's a problem, but what's the solution? We just talked about it. Say it with me, async payments. So, still no, but basically my point is that like when you layer async payments on top of this reusable invoice concept, suddenly this new use case for Lightning is unlocked that wasn't possible before, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, exciting, huge step forward in Lightning UX, and brings us a lot closer to what users have come to expect from like Venmo and Cash App. It's really cool. Now you're all excited about it. When's it coming? So the current status is, for LDK's part, we want to try to get it in this year. We have 2 engineers on it, me and Art Bussman, and that's our goal. We're also going to be heavily involved in the spec. And there seems what's exciting about this protocol too is that there's pretty good consensus building around it. So Rusty from CLN and T-Bass from Eclair are also pretty heavily involved in the protocol development, and they're all excited about it. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. It's very high priority. So yeah, all right. So that was kind of async payments. Yeah.
You probably heard about ARC. Is there any fork in this protocol to work with something like ARC? ARC has the same similar problems that Lightning has, so you have to consider being online. So could this protocol work for ARC as well?
In theory, probably. I don't really know ARC that well. I haven't looked into it that much, but I mean, the idea of an onion message is just kind of a flexible message. So it's just basically telling someone, hold on to this LSP until someone comes back online. So I imagine that would probably work. Yeah, is that?
Yes.
Okay, so we kind of went through async payments, the important use cases that it enables, and now I kind of want to get into more of like the technical details and like go down a walk-down protocol development lane, talk about onion messages, route blending, and like future directions for async payments. So how does onion messages fit into the async payments? Well, async payments wouldn't be possible without onion messages. Because, like, for example, at this stage of the protocol, right, Alice has locked in her Bitcoin, and now she wants to tell Bob's LSP, let my LSP know when Bob comes back online. And we're going to focus on this message. What is it? Well, it's an onion message. And at a very high level, onion messages are lightweight, flexible messages. They were originally introduced for offers of Bolt 12, and they use blind routes for privacy, which we'll also get into later. So to understand, I want to kind of go through how onion messages work in a little more detail, because they're actually not that hard to understand, but so for this example, let's say Alice wants to send an onion message to Bob, and she wants him to say hi, like something really simple. And basically her first step would be to find a route to Bob, and she sees that if she wants to send an onion message to him, she could send it to her LSP, to Dave, to Bob's LSP, and finally to Bob. So let's say she wants to construct this onion message. Her first step is to create an onion layer for Bob, right? So this can only be read by him, and this contains the message she wants to send. Then she will add a layer to the onion for Bob's LSP, saying, hey, forward this inner onion to Bob. Similarly, she'll add one for Dave, saying, forward this inner onion to Bob's LSP. And finally, she'll add a layer for her LSP, and this kind of completes her onion message. And so if we go to here, Alice will first forward her LSP. Her LSP will unwrap its layer, sees that it needs to forward the inner to Dave. It'll forward to Dave. Dave will unwrap his layer and sees that he needs to forward the inner onion to Bob's LSP, forward it along. Bob's LSP sees he needs to forward to Bob. And finally, Bob will unwrap his layer and he'll receive his message saying hi. So that's a high level how onion messages work. And if we want to tie this back into async payments, at this stage of the program, Alice has her Bitcoin locked in. She wants to tell Bob's LSP, to let her know when Bob comes back online. So how she'll do this, we kind of just went through it, but basically she'll create an onion layer for Bob's LSP saying, when Bob comes back online, let my LSP know the release of payment. Then she'll add an onion layer for Dave. Then she'll add an onion layer for her LSP, and this completes her onion message, and she'll send it along. It'll get to her LSP, see the need to forward to Dave. It'll get to Dave, Dave will unwrap his layer, and so on. And finally, Bob's LSP will get the message saying, and he'll just start immediately watching for Bob to come back online. So yeah, that's how onion messages kind of like fits into async payments. But, this all looks great, but from this example, it kind of looks like Alice had to know who Bob was and also who his LSP was, which is kind of a lot of information to be revealing, especially in like the Tim on Twitter case where he's posting it publicly, so like anyone on the network can see it. It just kind of, the privacy story isn't so good right now. So great, what about privacy? And if we go back to this slide, we just talked about onion messages, and the solution is our next topic, route blending, and that's how we kind of get privacy back in this protocol. So if we go back to this example of like Alice just wanting to send like a simple onion message to Bob, but let's say Bob wants to conceal both his identity and his LSP's identity in this example. And to understand how he can do that, we're going to have to take a little bit of a look at like a wider network graph. So we still have our same people, we still have Alice, her LSP, Dave, and Bob, but I mean, this is like a more realistic zoomed out version of the network, because on the network there's going to be a bunch of nodes. Like it wasn't just a simple line, there's all these other nodes, all these other channels, and this is how route blending adds privacy, because if Bob wants to construct a blinded path to himself to conceal his identity, his first step is to select an introduction node. And let's say he selects Dave as his introduction node, which is the only node that Alice is going to be able to actually see who they are. If he does this, that means that all of these highlighted nodes are essentially in Bob's anonymity set. So this means when Alice sends a message to Bob, and all she sees is his blinded path, and basically from her perspective, Bob could be any one of these highlighted nodes, and because of route blinding, she is unable to narrow his identity down to any one of the specific nodes. So from her perspective, he could be any one of them, and that's how route blinding provides privacy. Yeah? Okay, so the reason is because if we go to the next slide, if Bob selects Dave, that means the hops of his blinded path are going to be Dave to his LSP to himself, right? That's a 3-hop blinded path. So what that means is any hops within 2 hops of Dave could be Bob, if that makes sense. And you might be wondering, why can't it just be nodes that are exactly 2 hops away? And the reason is because there can be dummy hops in blinded routes, and that's part of how it adds privacy. So like, it could be that this, even if it's a 3-hop blinded path, it could be that this is the recipient and this is just like a fake out, you know what I mean? So, does that make sense? Yeah.
So each onion wrapper, so to say it like that, is digitally signed in such a way that each node with its own private key can wrap it.
Yes.
So like my next question would be, is there any limit on the layers an onion can have? Because if that's set up like that, it probably means that onion layers have to be unwrapped sequentially, right?
Yeah.
So there could be a risk of network separation if I create a too large onion that it has to be passed around potentially many times over. What's the protection for that? From the saturation and network saturation standpoint?
I mean, onion messages are very lightweight, but basically the protection ends up being the limit on the size of the onion. So you basically, there's a limit on the size of a lightning message and a certain number of kilobytes or whatever. So I think in practice you can't have more than 18 or 19 hops without exceeding that size. And but in reality, most people don't want to do that because your reliability tends to degrade if you use a lot of hops.
So just mentioning from an attacker standpoint, what you just found the network, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to spam with onion messages, because you might be wondering, like, is this a DOS vector? Like, if everyone is always sending these messages, like, what if someone tries to, like, stream a YouTube video, like, or something insane like that? Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, basically what's going to happen and what is already implemented is just rate limiting. So you're not going to, you're basically, if you're a smart node and you're afraid of this, you're not going to forward messages from people that aren't your channel peers. Like, you're not going to forward to random people on the network, and, yeah, you're going to just limit the amount of onion messages that any one of your peers can forward through you. And after a certain point, you're going to send them a message saying, hey, you need to stop because, like, you're being a little too much right now. So.
And a follow-up question, just is it possible to split a big message into many onions, perhaps, and then sequentially, so by keeping a sequence number, reveal the message on the receiving end, perhaps?
In theory, yeah. I mean, that would be sending a pretty big message, I think. So I would be
much like TCP, perhaps.
Yeah, in theory, I think that could be possible. Yeah. Was there another?
Well, basically, we're going to get into that, but basically Bob is going to construct his blinded route, and Alice will be able to see Dave's node ID.
That blinded route will be in the invoice?
Yes. Yeah. OK, so we have this set up. Bob has selected Dave as his introduction node. And what that means is that these are the hops in the blinded path that he is constructing. So he's picked his hops, and when he constructs this blinded route, if Alice wants to send a message, it will go to Dave to his LSP to him. And given these hops, Bob's first step is to create an encrypted blob. And this blob is intended for Dave. It can only be read by Dave. And it tells Dave, like, hey, you need to forward this inner onion message to Bob's LSP. Then he'll create another encrypted blob for his LSP saying, hey, forward this to Bob. And finally, he'll create an encrypted blob for himself, and this will contain a path ID so Bob can verify that he originally created this blinded path, if that makes sense. Finally, he'll add Dave's unblinded node ID on top, and when you put all these ingredients together, this is Bob's blinded route. So a little bit simplified, but not really. So Bob has this blinded route that he's built, and let's say for this example, he gives it to Alice. And Alice has her message. She just wants to send hi, and she wants to send it to this blinded route. So let's see how she'll construct this onion message with route blinding. So her first step is kind of the same as just sending an unblinded onion message, except she will include this encrypted blob in the onion layer that she constructs for Bob. So she constructs this onion layer for Bob, and it contains her message the same as before, but now it also contains the encrypted blob. Next, she'll add an onion layer. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so Alice wants to send an onion message to this blinded route that Bob has provided for her, right? So her first step is to create the innermost onion layer, which can only be read by Bob, but she doesn't know who he is because of the blinded route. And like, what's different between an unblinded onion message, and a blinded one like this is that she will first when she builds Bob's onion layer, she'll put the encrypted blob in the onion layer alongside her message. Whereas when she was sending an unblinded onion message, she just put the message in there. So she now has this extra step. Next, she will add an onion layer for Bob's LSP without knowing who it is. And this contains, the blob that Bob made before. And sorry, Keynote is weird, just ignore that. But then she'll add an onion layer for Dave, kind of the same as before. And finally, she will add an onion layer for her LSP, saying to forward to Dave. And so the only hops that Alice knows are in this path are her LSP and Dave, if that makes sense. And okay, so now she's constructed this onion message, and just going to go through how it gets sent really quick. First, it goes to her LSP. Her LSP unwraps its layer, sees it needs to forward to Dave. That's the same as usual. Then she forwards to Dave. Dave unwraps his layer. But as a second step, because it was sent to a blinded route, he now has to decrypt the decrypted blob that only he could read that Bob made. And now he's able to see that he needs to forward the remainder to Bob's LSP. So he forwards to Bob's LSP. Bob's LSP unwraps its layer. Then it decrypts the decrypted blob that Bob provided in his blinded route, sees that he needs to forward to Bob, forwards it along. Bob unwraps his layer. He sees the message. And he also verifies the path ID. And that's kind of how sending an onion message works and maintains privacy at the same time. So to tie this back to async payments, once again, at this stage, Alice Bitcoin locked in. She wants to send a message to Bob's LSP. And so, like we talked about, create a little more screen real estate. Let's say that Bob provided this blinded route in his invoice, right? So as we talked about, she'll first create a layer for Bob's LSP containing the encrypted blob, and then also containing the message, right? And then, like we talked about, she'll add a layer for Dave, and finally, she'll add a layer for her LSP. So if she wants to forward this message, it will first go to her LSP, who will unwrap, sees that it needs to forward to Dave, forward it along, Dave will unwrap the decrypt the decrypted blob, and finally, it will end up at Bob's LSP, who will unwrap the layer and verify the path ID. And then from that point, it will immediately start watching for Bob to come back online per the async payments protocol, because it knows that somewhere out there's money waiting for Bob. Yeah?
If the onion message does not contain that explicit asynchronous statement, so is just the message dropped?
What do you mean?
I mean, let's say it says when Bob comes online, tell my LSP to release the payment. So that's the explicit instruction to do once the message is received by LSPP. So if that was not the message, would the message be dropped or rejected somehow?
I mean, if any node receives a message it can't understand, it will probably just drop the message.
No, but let's say that Alice did not broadcast the message with that specific instruction.
Oh, well, yeah, she needs to encode that specific instruction for it to work. Yeah.
So it will be rejected or dropped.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be able to send it in the first.
Yeah, receive it as instruction.
Yeah. I mean, you could send like a mangled one, I guess. I think that's kind of what he's saying. Yeah. Anything? All right, what's next? All right, so that's kind of how async payments really relies on onion messages, and then how it adds route blinding on top to add privacy. And interestingly, onion messages and route blinding were not added to Lightning for async payments. They were actually added for Bolt 12, which comes with other benefits like reusable QR, static invoice, et cetera. And, but async payments basically leans on these, like when Bolt 12 added these things, it added really powerful primitives that can then be used in protocols like async payments. And we, even though they weren't for async payments, we're still getting these like massive UX benefits. And it's still like a, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The idea with async payments is to have them on by default, or would they be slower for a face-to-face payment, for example?
Face-to-face, I mean, it adds like, I guess, a message. It is a round trip to Bob's LSP. It's not a payment round trip, it's a message round trip, which is pretty like lightweight processing-wise. But I mean, yeah, definitely this is the kind of thing where we're gonna have to deploy it, and we're gonna have to make adjustments, iterate on it, make it faster, better route finding, et cetera.
Potentially could be, every payment could potentially be asynchronous. It would be taken up immediately if Bob's is online.
That's true, yeah, you could, yeah, that's true, yeah.
So the person who generates the invoice can say, I don't want to do async on this payment, right?
Yeah, because it's like a feature that you'll advertise.
If you're buying a coffee, like, what's the point? You know the person's right there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you definitely wouldn't want to use it like in all circumstances. It's just for these kind of cases.
Like you were thinking about you that you were a developer. She's thinking about how normal people like you, grandma, who's not a developer, can just.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
So what is the trade-off of basically you have like a bigger line routing, you have more size, let's say, on when you're transmitting versus like instant payment. That's the only trade-off. And that additional round trip to get the pattern in.
Yeah, it's pretty much just the extra messages sent. I want to say like everything else is pretty much normal. Yeah.
Is there an additional cost that comes with the message, with sending an async message?
That's the nice part about onion messages, honestly, is that they are extremely lightweight and they're pretty much free. You don't have to store anything. Yeah.
I would say that also now it's not like it's a single point of failure, the LSP, but you are relaying a little bit in the LSP, but anyways, the probabilities that the payment fail decrease even with the LSPs, right? Or no, like what I mean is like you are trusting the LSPs to do something. You expect that. That would be for me the.
Yes. That is, you are trusting that. You're not trusting them, like, they can't take your money at any point. Yeah.
You trust them to do something, but it's the same way you trust a node.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that is true. They are incentivized to because they'll collect a forwarding fee, like if they successfully forward the payment. But yeah, technically it's it's not enforced. Yeah.
So if the communication, let's say LSPB is down for the scenario you just shown, would LSPA wait for LSPB to go online to continue the forwarding?
Guys, let her finish the presentation.
It's okay. It's all good. I'm almost done. Yeah, if LSPB went down, I mean, ideally, in the original invoice, there would be multiple blinded paths. So if someone goes down, you can just try over another one, if that makes sense. But I mean, yeah, these are definitely like some details that are going to have to be like ironed out over time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In terms of privacy, the message of the route blinding says that the LSP node is inside of the chart. It is like he has the ID of the node.
Yeah, the sender.
Yeah. But isn't that a privacy issue? Because he can have that node that time, but then another time have another ID and have another ID and de-anonymizing.
There's definitely like a lot of, this is I think an area of research because I think there are some questions about like like you provide a blinded route from one person, now you provide it for another person. Like, does that narrow down your anonymity set? Which I think is what you're kind of saying. And yeah, potentially yes, but I mean, in this case specifically, like if you're an LSP and you have like at least like 100 customers, even if you're revealing the LSP, like Bob could still be any one of those 100 private customers, if you get what I'm saying. So there is like a lot of privacy even with like a 2-hop blinded path, and adding more hops just adds like additional privacy. But I mean, this is, I think, yeah. I mean, if there was a company that placed itself on every single route of every single payment, like it would definitely be able to learn some stuff. There's like, this is a step in privacy for Lightning Network, but there's more steps to be taken. But I mean, to go back to, I mean, this is kind of like the anonymity set argument. Like by selecting Dave, you have all these anonymous, like Bob could be any one of these, but you're saying that if in the next invoice Bob selected a different node, that could narrow it down, right? Yeah, so I mean, that is something to consider, but I think that is also something that implementations can factor in when they create blinded routes, and like they will basically try to select routes that create the biggest anonymity set possible. And what about zero knowledge proof?
Can they create zero knowledge that, okay, one second, that this is my node without revealing that this is node? No, because he has to make a connection, right?
Yeah, you should send a mailing list email about that. That sounds interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, thank you. And just to restate it for the recording, like the Lightning Network diameter is only about 10, so if you had like a 5-hop blinded path, your anonymity set would be like 80% of the network. So even if you then selected a different introduction node, like yes, you're drawing like a different Venn diagram circle, but all of the circles still encompass like 70% of the network total, which is pretty big. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I don't know how much time I have, but 5 minutes, okay, that's perfect. Great. So we talked about any messages, we talked about route blinding, and now I have one slide for this. I'm just gonna touch on like future directions, like, or this is the next talk or whatever. But basically for async payments, we currently plan to build it on top of Bolt 12. So there's gonna be some like spec work done for that soon. And yeah, that's gonna be fun. And what's cool is that if you implement async payments, you basically have already implemented Bolt 12 because most of the development work for Bolt 12 is onion messages and route blinding, which is what is needed for async payments. So it's they kind of like nicely pair together that way. And secondly, when you add like trampoline on top of async payments, I don't really have time to explain it that well, but basically it helps in terms of like sender reliability. Oh yeah, your question was about like the sender locking in a route earlier. And when you add trampoline, the sender doesn't have to lock in their route. And in this way, Alice's LSP can keep retrying like on her behalf over a bunch of different routes. And yeah, it's very important. And this is also something that Arik on my team is working on for LDK. So it's also the year of trampoline as well, I think. And finally, super don't have time and also don't understand it that well, but async payments and PTLCs also comes with a lot of benefits. And basically, the PTLCs is going to help with kind of the reusable invoice portion because with Bolt 12, you have to request an invoice, but if Bob is offline, you know, it kind of like addresses issues there. And yeah, so thank you. And now I get to check out LDK, and there's a hackathon next month in London. So yeah, thank you so much.